and that is that there was a fight and evidence of foul.
Somewhere in a Quantico forensics lab, a piece of GPS data sat quietly proving a man wrong. Not accusing him. Not screaming. Just sitting there indifferent, showing a location that didn't match a word of what he told police. That's where this update begins. Not with a splash, not with a body, but with a signal from a phone that never lied because it never needed to. For months, the official version of what happened to Lynette Hooker came from exactly one living witness, her husband, Brian. He told authorities that on the night of April 4th, the two of them were riding their small dinghy back to their yacht, Soulmate, anchored somewhere off the Abaco Islands, when the water turned on them. Rough seas, he said. High wind. He said Lynette went over the side, and that she'd had the engine safety key clipped to her when she fell, which meant the moment she hit the water, the little boat lost power too. He said he tried to reach her, that the current pulled them apart faster than he could fight it, and that he drifted for hours before the dinghy finally beached itself, alone, at Marsh Harbor. It was the kind of story that made sense on its surface. Married sailors, decades on the water together, a freak accident in the dark. It's the story that launched a search involving Coast Guard boats, volunteer fire crews, kayaks, ATVs, and ordinary people burning their own gas money to comb miles of coastline for a woman who might still be alive. Stay with me here, because this is where it gets complicated. Investigators eventually pulled location data off one of Brian Hooker's electronic devices. And according to a U.S. official who spoke to CBS News, that data showed a track that simply did not match what he told them. Instead of drifting helplessly the way he described, the device showed movement out on the water, stopping in the Sea of Abaco, and then returning. Not floating with no engine. Moving. Stopping. Coming back. Ask yourself why that detail matters. A man with no propulsion doesn't stop and start. A man with no propulsion doesn't choose where he goes. That single discrepancy did something no amount of public sympathy could undo. It changed the entire shape of the investigation. What began as a search and rescue mission was already sliding into a recovery operation within days. The grim shift authorities make once hope of finding someone alive starts running out. But this new data pushed it somewhere else entirely. A U.S. official confirmed to CBS News that the case is now being investigated as a possible foreign murder of a U.S. national. Not a drowning. Not a tragic accident at sea. A possible murder. Let's talk about the timeline, because timelines are where the cracks usually show first. Brian Hooker reported his wife missing on April 5th. 3 days later, on April 8th, Bahamian police took him into custody, a detention an official later told Reuters was based on, in their words, some probable cause. He was questioned for hours. His detention was extended once, then again, while investigators tried to decide whether to charge him. And then, on April 13th, after 5 days in custody, he walked out a free man. No charges filed. His attorney called it exactly what you'd expect a defense attorney to call it, a case where prosecutors simply couldn't make a decision in time. But here's what should stop you for a second. Being released without charges is not the same as being cleared. The Bahamian police commissioner herself said the case remained active. Brian Hooker was still, by every official account, a person of interest. He just wasn't, at that moment, a charged one. Then came April 14th, and this is a moment worth sitting with. Brian Hooker gave an interview to a national news outlet, and in it, he said he still believed his wife might be alive, that he'd heard of people surviving days, even weeks, after falling overboard. He said he wasn't capable of just turning away from this. It was the language of a devoted husband refusing to give up hope. And then, less than 24 hours after that interview aired, he left the Bahamas and returned to the United States. His attorney said it was to be with his ailing mother. Maybe that's exactly what it was. But think about that for a moment, because the optics are hard to ignore. A man who just told cameras he couldn't turn away from searching for his missing wife turned around the very next day and left the country where she vanished. This is the part of the story where I want to hear from you, because there's no way to watch this timeline unfold without forming an opinion. Do you think a grieving husband leaves the search behind that quickly? Or does something else explain it? Drop your theory in the comments, because we are far from finished unpacking what investigators found next, and it only gets stranger from here. What comes after this is where the case stopped being about a tragic accident and started becoming something federal agents were quietly building toward for months. A search that would eventually put a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, cadaver dogs, and a specialized dive team back in the water off a coastline that had already been searched once before. And what they were looking for wasn't just a body. It was proof. By the time the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Margaret Norvell pulled into Marsh Harbor, this had stopped being a story about a missing woman and started becoming a story about a version of events that investigators no longer believed. On board was a specialized dive team, and their mission was specific: search waters that had never been searched before, in locations pointed to not by Brian Hooker's account, but by that GPS data pulled from his own device. Federal investigators had a warrant. They had a signature from the Bahamian government granting permission to operate in territorial waters. And they had a working theory that the man who reported his wife missing might have led them to the wrong stretch of ocean entirely, whether by mistake or by design. This is where things get serious. Investigators requested DNA samples, and Lynette Hooker's own daughter, Carly Aylesworth, along with her grandparents, gave mouth swabs so authorities would have something to match against if remains were ever recovered. Sit with that for a second. A family, already living through months of not knowing, agreeing to hand over their own DNA because the case had reached a point where finding a body, or a fragment of one, had become the realistic goal. Not finding Lynette. Finding what was left of her. And Carly had never fully bought her stepfather's story to begin with. In interviews given to NBC News, she described her mother as an experienced swimmer, someone who'd spent more than a decade of her life on boats, and she said she simply didn't believe Lynette would have accidentally gone overboard, let alone been wearing the dinghy's safety key when she did. She went further in comments to Fox News, alleging that her mother and stepfather had what she called a volatile relationship. Brian Hooker's attorney pushed back hard on that framing, telling reporters that investigators had never presented his client with a single piece of evidence suggesting wrongdoing. Two people, one family, telling two completely different stories about the same marriage. That's not unusual in cases like this. But it's also never nothing. This changes everything we thought we knew about who these two people actually were to each other. Because Brian and Lynette Hooker weren't strangers to an audience. They ran a YouTube channel together called The Sailing Hookers, chronicling years of life on the water, sunsets, anchorages, the whole romanticized dream of two people sailing off into a shared life. And according to reporting from the New York Post, their final video posted before Lynette vanished included a joke about the two of them getting sick of each other. Maybe it was nothing. Couple's joke. Maybe it was something. We don't get to know which, not from a throwaway line in a video posted days before a woman disappeared into the sea and never came home. If this story is sitting with you the way it's sitting with me, this is a good moment to hit subscribe, because this case is not close to over, and there is more evidence, more contradictions, and more timelines still to come. Let's go back to the boat itself for a moment, because Soulmate isn't just where this couple lived. It's now sitting in the hands of federal investigators. The Coast Guard Investigative Service seized the sailboat earlier in the case as part of the broader probe, along with electronic devices taken under a search warrant, the very devices that would go on to produce the GPS contradiction that reopened the entire search. Think about the sequence here. A man tells police his wife fell from a dinghy in one location. Investigators quietly pull data from his own phone. That data shows him somewhere else. And months later they're back in the water, searching a different patch of ocean entirely, guided not by his story, but by what his own device left behind. Now there is a claim circulating that goes further than anything confirmed by CBS, CNN, or ABC News, and it deserves to be treated with real caution. A podcast host covering this case has said that unnamed sources close to the investigation told her Lynette never went into the water off the dinghy at all, that she made it back aboard Soulmate, and that there is evidence of a struggle on the boat itself. It's an explosive claim, and if it's true, it would rewrite everything about how this case ends. But as of now, no law enforcement agency, no court filing, and no major news outlet has confirmed a single detail of it. No indictment has been announced. No suspect has been formally named. It's a claim from one source, about a case that is still, officially, unsolved. We have to hold that uncertainty honestly, because the moment true crime stops separating what's confirmed from what's alleged is the moment it stops being trustworthy. What we can say for certain is this. A woman is still missing. Her body has not been found. Her husband has never been charged with any crime, and through his attorney, he has repeatedly and categorically denied any wrongdoing. And yet the physical evidence collected so far, the GPS data that contradicted his account, the shift in search locations, the federal designation of this as a possible murder investigation, has moved this case further away from an accident and closer to something else entirely. Ask yourself what kind of person tells one story to police and leaves behind a digital trail that tells another. Ask yourself why a search that was supposed to be over months ago sent cadaver dogs and Coast Guard divers back into the water in June. And ask yourself what it means that the people who loved Lynette Hooker most, her daughter, her parents, are the ones who had to hand over their own DNA just so that if her body is ever found, someone can finally say for certain that they found her. Because right now, nobody can say that yet. And that unanswered question is exactly where we're headed next. Here's part 3, the final part. There's a particular kind of silence that surrounds a case like this one. The silence of a body that hasn't been found, of a family that goes to sleep every night without an answer, and of a legal system that moves at a pace no grieving parent or daughter would ever choose for themselves. That silence is where this case sits right now, in the space between what investigators suspect and what they can actually prove. Let's talk about what happens next, because it matters more than people realize. The rest of the physical evidence collected in this case, including material pulled from Soulmate itself and from the electronic devices seized under warrant, is still being processed by the FBI. Forensic work like this doesn't move at the speed of a news cycle. It moves at the speed of labs, of chain of custody, of results that have to hold up not in a headline, but in a courtroom if it ever gets that far. That's part of why, months after Lynette Hooker vanished, no charges have been filed against anyone. Not because nothing has been found. Because what has been found still has to be built into something that can survive cross-examination. And this is where I want to be honest with you about something, because it's the whole reason cases like this deserve careful coverage instead of easy answers. Brian Hooker has never been charged with a crime. Through his attorney, he has said, and I want to use his words here, that he categorically and unequivocally denies any wrongdoing. His lawyer has publicly asked the public to extend him the same consideration anyone would want if they found themselves in his position, under suspicion, with no evidence disclosed to them, in the middle of an active investigation. That's not nothing. In this country, and in this legal process, a person of interest is not the same as a guilty man, no matter how strange a timeline looks from the outside, no matter how many questions remain unanswered. But here's the other half of that same honesty. A woman is missing. Her daughter does not believe the story she was told. The federal government has designated this a possible murder investigation, not a drowning, not a tragic accident, a possible murder. Digital evidence contradicted the one account we have of what happened that night. And divers were sent back into the water, months later, not because the case had gone cold, but because someone found a reason to believe the answer was somewhere else all along. This changes everything we thought we knew, and it also changes nothing about what still has to happen before anyone can call this solved. That tension, between suspicion and proof, between a family's certainty and a legal system's requirements, is exactly where this case lives right now. It is not resolved. It may not be resolved for a long time. And anyone telling you with total certainty exactly what happened aboard that dinghy, or aboard Soulmate, on the night of April 4th, is telling you more than the evidence has confirmed so far. What we do know is enough to sit with. A 55-year-old woman, an experienced sailor, someone who spent more than a decade of her life on the water with the man she married, went into the sea one night and never came back. Her daughter has spent months fighting for updates, for searches, for the simple, brutal dignity of a body to bury. Volunteers who never knew Lynette Hooker personally spent hundreds of hours combing beaches and waterways, because that is simply what they do when someone goes missing on their coastline. And somewhere in a federal evidence locker, a phone's location history sits as the single most inconvenient fact in this entire case, a fact that doesn't care about anyone's version of events, only about where it actually was. If you've made it this far, you already understand why this case has held so many people's attention for months. It isn't just a mystery. It's a test of whether the truth can survive long enough, through labs and lawyers and silence, to actually reach the people who deserve it most. Lynette Hooker's family is still waiting for that truth. So are the investigators working this case. And so, frankly, is everyone watching this video. This story is not over. There is no verdict here, no indictment to report, no clean ending to hand you. There is only a woman who is still missing, a husband who has never been charged, and an investigation that keeps finding reasons not to let this go quiet. If you believe this case deserves more attention, more scrutiny, and more honest coverage than it's gotten, share this video with someone who hasn't heard about it yet. Tell me in the comments what you think that GPS data really proves. And stay with this channel, because the moment there's an actual answer, official, confirmed, and real, you will hear it here first. Until then, Lynette Hooker is still out there somewhere, and so is the truth about what happened to her.